I wonder if younger people listening to these records, and knowing what they are, that they're history, not written in a book, but as it was being lived, I wonder if they get an emotion as I do, or I wonder if they would just consider it a kind of curiosity.
It must seem like ancient history, but to me it makes it very much alive.
The voices of those decades that have gone seem to be talking again, speaking words that once made people tremble and rejoice and laugh and cry, sometimes speaking words that will not die.
As part of my job, I've been sent by CBS to Union Square. I decided to stop by my high school alma mater. I'm at the Church of St. Francis Xavier on 16th Street. They're having a sunrise mass filled with prayer for our soldiers and other war workers. The people are stoic. Now isn't the time to lose ourselves in emotion. Sunrise is 5:25 a.m. I hear American troops have turned the tide of the battle at Omaha landing point, with warships backing them up at sea. Give a listen to the CBS broadcast. David Anderson, Arthur Mann, Paul White, and Edward R. Murrow have reports from London. Quentin Reynolds will describe Eisenhower's speech to occupied Europe, while Bill Henry and Joe McCaffrey report from Washington.
Once again, back at Columbia's newsroom in New York, we've been listening to Richard Hottelet of CBS broadcasting from England and giving us a description of the flight he made in a Marauder over a 7-mile stretch of the French coast. He told us, as you've heard, that they met no opposition in the air and just light flak, just light anti-aircraft fire from the Germans on the ground. Now, it's 5:15 in New York City at this particular moment, and I was about to give you a roundup in case you had just got up out of bed and were tuning in and hadn't heard what's happened. Briefly, of course, the invasion has started. General Eisenhower has issued the first communique. We've been getting broadcasts from London all the time. And straight along here, we've been on the air for 2 hours and 15 minutes in this particular broadcast. We started at 3 o'clock in the morning Eastern Wartime. But once again, I'm afraid the summary for the benefit of those of you who have tuned in will have to wait, because in a few moments, we are again going to bring you a broadcast from overseas and another description by a correspondent. So now for another of the pool broadcasts, we take you to London for the report of David Anderson. Go ahead, London.
This is David Anderson speaking from London. There is no doubt in my mind that Hitler was literally caught with his pants down by the Allied landing on the north coast of France. I was able to gain substantiation for this opinion while working together with a wing of an RAF Tactical Air Force somewhere in England up to a few hours ago. For some time after H hour, there was practically no sign of German Army transport on any of the roads in the whole of the invasion area. At 1:30 yesterday afternoon, I entered the gates of an RAF station. Little did I realize at the time that within hours, the big show would be on. And yet, no sooner had I checked in with the adjutant than I was told that I couldn't leave the station under any circumstances until after H hour. Though I was prepared to stay for several days, I didn't fancy the idea of spending an indefinite period of time in a cold, windy tent. That's all the housing accommodation offered on a tactical field, since the flyers and crew must be prepared to move camp on short notice. But my fears of a long isolation were short-lived. The adjutant introduced me to the group captain, the youngest, incidentally, in the entire RAF. He's only 27, and yet it seemed that he looked considerably older yesterday. The climax in tactical bombing was to be reached last night. I sensed this immediately as he smiled briefly and said out of the corner of his mouth, "I've been waiting for this for a long time." He was full of apologies when he told me that he couldn't take me on an operational flight. If I were to go, it would mean that one of the pilots would have to fly without a navigator. On these vital D-Day operations, that would be suicidal, he said. But he did consent to take me up for a short hop. He called it a flip, in order that I might get a better picture of the job facing the pilots, and so that I might see some of the ships waiting to hit the beaches. We took off and struck out for one of the invasion ports. It was at a place where Jerry had done poor reconnaissance work. For miles, I saw ships dotting the water below. These were some of the ships which even now are touching the north coast of France. Even though I was impressed with the size of this convoy, the group captain told me that this was a comparatively small-sized convoy. We circled back to the field, and I could see that the groupie's thoughts were engrossed in the operation due to begin in a very few hours. I knew, too, that he was disappointed, since he had mentioned that he was grounded on D-Day. He could be of too much use to the enemy had he been captured. After we had landed, the group captain went off to attend to last-minute details, but not before he had offered me all of the facilities at his disposal. This offer included a glimpse into the Holy of Holies, his map room. For days, guards had been posted there, both outside and inside this room. Some were armed with Bren guns. Others carried rifles with fixed bayonets. The enemy at all costs must be kept away from this vital information. Information which, it has been proven, he did not possess. I was able to roam around the field at will and to participate in the briefings for this D-Day operation. There were two of these. The one was conducted by the group captain and the other by the respective wing commanders. The first was quite general, a final brushing up on bombing and strapping tactics. I was particularly impressed by the emphasis laid on the safety factor, the proper height from which to bomb, the obstacles to be encountered, and a reminder to the pilots to judge their height above ground correctly in order to avoid running into the side of a hill. The second briefing concerned the flight itself, the D-Day operation. Although no one was told that H hour would come when he was over the north coast of France, a matter of security in case of one of them fell into the hands of the enemy, there was no one in the briefing room who doubted that his was a D-Day job. This could be seen by the tenseness with which each man listened. Everyone was anxious to get on with the job, to try the next step in the tactical air warfare, which is designed to keep the Germans from moving into the operational area. I stood with the group captain and watched the planes take off. Hardly had the first plane taxied to the head of the runway when he turned to me and said, "That's where I should have been. But they can't keep me out of the air tomorrow," he continued. One by one, the planes circled overhead to get their final bearings before making the flight to this all-important coast of France. Each man had his area of attack. Each man knew what was expected of him. But as I watched the planes take off, I noticed something strange, something brand new for the Germans to see. No longer were the planes camouflaged. Last night, for the first time, these planes bore the markings of the Allied Expeditionary Air Force. These markings consist of alternate black and white stripes on the wings and belly. These markings, I understand, were put on all Allied planes by order of General Eisenhower in order that Allied ships would have an easier task in distinguishing them between friend and foe. This is essential in an operation of this magnitude. As a matter of fact, the paint hardly had time to dry, since this was all last-minute work. From the airfield, we went into the control room. There was nothing to do now but wait. I noticed the estimated time of return and strolled through the control tower. I was waiting in the briefing room once again as the first pilots reported. Their task had been to hunt out and shoot up or bomb any German transport on the roads on the French coast. From the very beginning, it was hoped that none would be seen. This would be a definite indication that the Hun didn't know where we were going to land. And as the boys came back, one by one, this hope was realized. Except for a few scattered cars on the road, nothing was seen. Most of the pilots saw no transport whatsoever, so they concentrated on bombing road junctions and railways. The Germans were caught napping. The work of this RAF tactical group was only one part of a gigantic program. Before these boys had finished their missions, the airborne troops, British and American, were dropped in their appointed places. Then RAF bombers went out to work on the landing beaches. They dropped between 6,000 to 8,000 tons of bombs. Capacity loads were carried last night. Shortly before dawn, the Allied naval guns began shelling the beach area. And at the same time, American liberators and fortresses took over where the RAF left off. Before the sun had risen over the horizon, Allied troops were landed behind a smoke screen. They were guided to the landing beaches by markers, set out by midget submarines, which spent 3 days in crossing the channel to carry out this most important but hazardous task. Now, the Allies are on the beaches in force. Ahead of them are the airborne troops. Between them and in front of the airborne troops are the Germans. The job has just begun. And yet, as I left the RAF station a couple of hours ago, I came away with a feeling that the reports brought back by the flyers were just those that we had hoped for. The Hun was surprised. Now it's up to us to take advantage of this. I now return you to the United States.
Columbia's news headquarters in New York once again. Bob Trout speaking. We have heard a pool broadcast. That is one of the broadcasts by a correspondent representing the combined Allied radio networks. David Anderson speaking from Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Forces somewhere in Great Britain. Here's an interesting bit of news, which I'd like to give you at this point. It'll be extremely interesting to those of you who have been staying with us all night on this invasion broadcast and who heard how the story began with the Germans putting out wild reports that the invasion had begun long before we got the Allied word that it had indeed begun. The Federal Communications Commission reports to the OWI that up to 10:30 in the morning German time, 4:30 a.m. Eastern Wartime, the German DNB agency has not yet informed the German people through the German domestic press or radio of the Allied invasion of northern France. And this was more than 4 hours after this same DNB agency had told the European press outside Germany of the invasion, and after the German Transocean Agency had moved a similar wireless dispatch for overseas consumption. That was the report, or those were the reports, I should say, which started us off on this all-night broadcasting. At that time, we had warned you that they were only German reports, but at 3:30 in the morning New York time, we got the word that the invasion had begun. And now for another report of the pool broadcasts, we take you now to London for the report of Arthur Mann. Go ahead, London.
This is Arthur Mann speaking from London. As was expected, the Germans, being on the receiving end, first announced to the world this morning's great Allied invasion of France. Through the hours of darkness, the vast invasion armada steamed toward the French coast. Thousands of assault and landing craft, covered by fleets of Allied warships, and all operating under cover of a vast Allied air umbrella. This was the culmination toward which the vast headquarters organization of General Eisenhower, Supreme Commander, Allied Expeditionary Force, has been working for many months. I return you now to the United States.
Columbia's news headquarters in New York once again. Before we switch to London for that pool broadcast for the combined Allied radio networks by Arthur Mann, I was telling you something about the German reports which started the all-night activity in this Columbia newsroom, and I was quoting both DNB, the German news agency DNB, and the German Transocean Agency. Perhaps it will help you to understand the news a little better as we go along, to tell you that DNB is an agency which transmits by wireless and maintains separate services for the European press and for the German press. The Transocean Agency transmits its dispatches mostly in English and is used by the Germans to distribute their news propaganda for overseas consumption. I'll repeat that from time to time as the day goes on. That's the difference between DNB and Transocean. Now, we've been on the air here since 3 o'clock in the morning New York time. In this particular broadcast, we have paused once for station identification. It is time for us to pause again, but I should like to make this rather lengthy introduction to our station break to inform the staff members of our affiliate stations that, of course, we are continuing our coverage of the invasion. We're by no means signing off. We are merely going to have a 15-second break. In 15 seconds, we shall be back on the air again. And now for a 15-second identification, this is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System. Columbia's News Headquarters in New York once again. Bob Trout speaking, and again we resume our coverage of the invasion, which began last night and which was announced officially from London at 3:32 in the morning Eastern War Time. A brief dispatch from Reuters, the British news agency. The military correspondent of Reuters says today that Adolf Hitler is taking personal command of all German anti-invasion operations. Hitler, according to this Reuters dispatch, is surrounded by his staff, including 4 field marshals, and is believed to have moved his headquarters to some place in northern France. That's what the Reuters correspondent says. I'm getting a few signals, and I believe that in a few moments we shall have another broadcast from London, but it seemed for a moment as if it was about to come momentarily, but I see now that there may be a few more seconds before it does. Well, to continue talking, there's a great deal to talk about, especially as I am sure that our audience is now being augmented. A great many of you are tuning in for the first time. You missed our all-night broadcast that has been going on here since 12:30 in the morning approximately, 30 minutes past midnight Eastern War Time. And I shall summarize again, because once again I can't do it, because here in Columbia's World News Headquarters, Paul White, the director of news broadcasts for CBS, is about to hold a two-way transatlantic conversation with Edward R. Murrow, the chief of Columbia's European correspondents. We're going to bring the CBS network in on this conversation to give you an idea of how some phases of this business of covering the invasion are handled. And now, here is Paul White.
Hello, Admiral. Hello, CBS London.
Hello, New York. Hello, New York. Hello, Paul.
I just thought that perhaps the audience would be interested in how we're setting up these pool broadcasts, and since we understand there is no more pool copy available at this moment, I thought we'd have a little conversation with you.
Well, Paul, what we're doing is this. We're going to continue to pool for the next hour or two, simply trying to move the material as fast as it comes in to all 4 of the networks. By the way, what kind of signal are we putting in?
Putting in a very fine signal. Our congratulations go to the engineers over there, because the signal has been uniformly good throughout.
Good, excellent. Things have been a little confused over here, you know. Our quarters are a little crowded, and just outside the studio there's an elderly charwoman who's busy scrubbing the floor. She's in some danger of being trampled to death all the while, but I think she's probably the most unconcerned person in this building. She just goes right on scrubbing.
Well, a few moments ago, I had a young lady come in here. I say young lady, that is a compliment, with a vacuum cleaner, but she didn't stay very long. Ed, is it now possible to reveal the dispositions of our staff, where we have various men?
Well, Paul, we hope to have some action recordings back from the Navy before long. Charlie Collingwood is out on an LCT. And Larry LeSueur is with the American Ground Forces, and Bill Downs with the British, and Bill Shadell is somewhere at sea.
All right, fine. As a matter of fact, all of the men who were on from the various networks have turned in a swell job, and I don't know how much an audience we had, except that I think all of it was on all night. And I believe that we'll stay right with the pool operation as long as you want us to continue, and then we'll break away with our own stuff.
Well, I think all of us will keep trying. Most of us look on this as something more than just a way to make a living, you know.
All right. Now, you don't see any more pool copy in the offing at the moment, is that right?
Right.
Okay, then we'll break away here and do some local broadcasting. Meanwhile, monitoring this circuit in case you have some more information.
All right, Paul. Talking with you later.
Righto. Bye.
And now we're back in the studio at Columbia's News Headquarters, which joins our newsroom. Paul White's been holding a conversation with Edward R. Murrow in London. Paul White, our director of news broadcasts here in New York. The whole country, all of you who have tuned in, have been able to hear this conversation, but by one of those ironical twists. As a matter of fact, I couldn't hear it here in the studio. I do know that Mr. Murrow was telling us that Bill Downs, our Columbia correspondent, is with the British forces, Larry LeSueur is with the ground forces, and Charles Collingwood is with an LST. And now, Quentin Reynolds hasn't had anything to say to us for quite some time. He's been sitting here listening to all these broadcasts coming from London as we've been switching so rapidly and interrupting our attempts to summarize the situation. For those of you who may be tuning in now, we've been on the air all night broadcasting the beginning of the invasion, but the details are coming in so swiftly. We shall summarize for you in a few moments, unless there is a broadcast from London, in which case, of course, we shall switch there. And now, here is Columbia's war correspondent, Quentin Reynolds.
For months, the people of France, Holland, and Belgium have been waiting for the word that would tell them that we were on our way to restore to them the world of freedom they once knew. These heartbreaking months of expectation, of false rumors, of high hopes that never materialized, came to an end early this morning when General Eisenhower himself talked to them and told them that the hour had come. His broadcast to the people of the temporarily conquered countries contained only 500 words. But those 500 words meant more to the people of Europe than the millions of words they have been forced to listen to from the voices of their temporary masters. Ever since the fall of France, they have been forced to listen to propaganda speeches, forced to read newspapers written by Nazi leaders. And then this morning, the calm voice of General Eisenhower electrified them and brought them hope for the future. General Eisenhower talked in English, but you didn't have to know our language to feel the deep sincerity, the calm confidence that his voice inspired. His talk was immediately translated into French, Flemish, German, and Norwegian. General Eisenhower writes as he fights, with direct, uncompromising forthrightness. His first sentence told the whole story when he said, "A landing was made this morning on the coast of France by troops of the Allied Expeditionary Force." This simple statement will be read by school children 100 years from now. It told the people of Europe that America had not failed them. He went on to say that this landing is part of the concerted United Nations plan for the liberation of Europe, made in conjunction with our great Russian allies. And then Eisenhower added, "The hour of liberation is approaching." Then he revealed something which most of us thought and hoped to be true, but we didn't know for sure. He revealed the fact that he has been in constant touch with the underground movements on the continent. He implied that strongly when he said, "Follow the instructions you have received." Undoubtedly, he has been in touch with the underground leaders for a long time, and today they know what to do. Then he spoke specifically to the people of France. He said, "Do not endanger your lives until I give you the signal to rise and strike the enemy. The day will come when I shall need your united strength. Until that day, I call upon you for the hard task of discipline and strength." He sounded a note of doom to the quislings of Europe when he said, and this sentence must have shriveled their craven hearts, "Those who have common cause with the enemy will be removed. As France is liberated from her oppressors, you yourselves will choose your representatives and the government under which you wish to live." This is in confirmation of the American policy of not interfering with the domestic affairs of European countries. The United Nations pledge that the people who have suffered under the Nazi yoke will themselves decide the retribution, a pledge that they will once again enjoy the independence that they lost when the German invader came to their country. Eisenhower's closing remarks will long be quoted. Today they are engraven in the hearts of millions of men who had almost lost hope. General Eisenhower said firmly and emphatically, "I call upon all who love freedom to stand with us. Keep your faith staunch. Our arms are resolute. Together we shall achieve final victory." I return you now to Bob Trout.
That was Quentin Reynolds here at Columbia's news headquarters in New York, discussing the broadcast which General Eisenhower himself made to the peoples of occupied Europe, a broadcast which we brought you direct from England. And now we've been broadcasting here all night off and on from Columbia's news headquarters in New York and from somewhere in Great Britain. We haven't yet heard from our own capital, Washington, D.C. That city must have been very busy all through the night, as we can well imagine. So now let's hear from CBS Washington, Bill Henry reporting.
Washington's first reaction to German reports of the Allied invasion was one of polite skepticism. But the very well-known voice of Colonel Ernest Dupuy, broadcasting the first official communique from General Eisenhower's headquarters, quickly eliminated all doubts as to the authenticity of the news. And that part of Washington whose business it is to organize this war and to handle the news of the war has been very much awake and on the job tonight from the moment of the receipt of the first reports from German sources that the Allied invasion of Europe had begun. The Pentagon building, the Navy building, and the White House were pretty brightly lighted within a few minutes after the receipt of the first reports from the German sources. Emergency staffs of officers were at their desks in the War and Navy departments, and appropriately enough, the first official statement to be issued came in the words of that grizzled hero, General John J. Pershing, the man who a quarter of a century ago led our American Expeditionary Force in the First World War. Here is General Pershing's statement. American troops have landed in Western Europe. As the overwhelming might of the Allied advances, it will be joined by the men of the occupied countries whose land has been overrun by the enemy, but whose spirit remains unconquered. 26 years ago, American soldiers, in collaboration with their allies, were locked in mortal combat with the German army. Their march of victory was never halted until the enemy laid down his arms in defeat. The American soldier of 1917-1918, fighting in a war of liberation, wrote by his deeds one of the most glamorous pages of military history. Today, the sons of American soldiers of 1917 and 18 are engaged in a like war of liberation. It's their task to bring freedom to peoples who have been enslaved. I have every confidence that they, together with their gallant brothers in arms, will win through to victory. That's the end of General John J. Pershing's statement, which was issued a little earlier this morning. There was no information available earlier at the White House to indicate that the president had been notified, first of all, of the rumors, but there's no doubt about it now, although there is no statement that has been issued from the president as yet. The State Department remained dark most of the night. Director Elmer Davis of the Office of War Information, who had chosen the evening period just previous to the invasion to talk to a group at the National Press Club on the general topic of psychological warfare and had illustrated it by showing a series of films, has been on the job all night and, of course, right up to the moment of the actual news of the invasion, said that he was without any confirmation of the German reports. Here in the Columbia newsroom at Washington, most of the staff has been on the job all night, just as it has been in New York, with the teletypes clicking and the telephones ringing. Washington in general, however, slept peacefully through the excitement. The streets were dark, and there were very few stragglers as I came down to the broadcasting studio. Those people whom I spoke to on the street didn't seem very greatly excited. There was a sort of an air of skepticism, as befits people who were up at that time in the morning anyhow. The people at my apartment house didn't seem excited. The night clerk was asleep. Out on the sidewalk, the doorman, while he was trying to get me a cab, was very skeptical. What do you suppose the big idea is, he asked. When he finally succeeded in flagging a taxi for me, I asked the driver if he'd heard the reports. He had a girl in the front seat with him and apparently had been otherwise engaged. However, he turned on his radio and could get nothing but a series of dance bands at that time. Well, he said if he was trying to get a dance band, you couldn't get one. Now you want news, all you can get is dance bands. But that was a long time ago, at shortly after midnight. Washington in general may have been sleeping peacefully, and there are no outward indications of excitement as yet. But this much is certain. Those in Washington whose business it is to handle news are very much on the job, and the top staff officers are in the back big map room at the Pentagon following every move. Colored pins have started to move on the big maps as word comes in of the progress of the action. Here in Washington, you know, is the headquarters of the Combined Joint Chiefs of Staff, British and American officers whose job it is to run this global war. These are the men who put General Eisenhower in charge of the invasion and whose general strategy governs the war all over the world. Most of the men, guns, planes, landing barges at Eisenhower's command came to him from the officers of this group in Washington. They will be carrying the war on elsewhere all over the globe and maybe planning something to keep our enemies elsewhere from just sitting around and reading about the invasion of Europe. Every move made everywhere in this world war is marked on the maps here. And for news from that headquarters in the Pentagon, and speaking from the Pentagon, here is Columbia's Joe McCaffrey. Go.
Here, in the very heart of the War Department, the Pentagon building, reporters and radio men milled about the press room of the Bureau of Public Relations, awaiting confirmation or denial of the invasion report. It was 3:25 when the announcement from General Searles, chief of the Bureau, arrived. There will be a bulletin at 3:32. Reporters danced to their phones, radio men to the controls. This was it. Everyone knew what was coming. Shortly after 3:34, the first bulletin was released, the confirmation from General Eisenhower's command. It was grouped with a statement by General John J. Pershing. It was apparent to all that the D-Day had been planned long in advance. The releases were all neatly mimeographed. The flash release had the date June 6, 1944, although the statement from Pershing carried no date. The announcement had a sobering effect, not only on the officers who were at the desk in the press department, but on the reporters and their assistants. Whereas the men had been joking and laughing around the teletype machines in the press room only a few moments before, the atmosphere became tense with the first word that an announcement was on its way. This building, one of the largest in the world, is an eerie sight. Newsmen are scattered throughout the huge section of the press branch, pounding out copy from handouts given by the press bureau. Officers are working, answering calls, and going on with what would have been their daily routine. While in another section of the building, men and women who work here every night are going about their business, many of them not knowing yet that the long-awaited D-Day has arrived. Scattered upon the desk which the reporters from the radio networks have borrowed, so as to be near their mics, are stories which have been released in the last few days about men who have fought other battles, heroes of Italy, heroes from the Pacific battlefronts. The effect of the news can be seen more plainly on the faces of the officers here than on anyone else. Many of the men they have served with, side by side, are now, at this very moment, engaged in bloody combat. They knew them as bunkmates. Many went through service schools with those in command of units in this invasion. While some, graying a little at the temples, have sons, last heard from in England. That is all they'll say. They're worried, but they're proud. Most of them, those with sons there now, were in France more than 25 years ago. They have been through it all, and now they have the same faith for their loved ones. Other men have seen action in campaigns in this war, and as a result of it, are now limited service from injuries occurred in combat. In a few hours, more than 35,000 people will come to work here. Many are already arriving for their full day's work. Although there are only a few civil service employees now here, girl secretaries routed from their beds by the news and called to work immediately, it is easy to see from their reactions that the rest of the employees will come to work today with renewed determination. These girls, typical of the much publicized government girl, both in story and movie, deserve a hand for the work they are turning out from not only this building, but every government building in Washington. In most cases, their pay is low, their housing conditions are not of the best, for the city is so crowded. But they come to work morning after morning, cheerful and ready to turn out a sound day's work. I return you now to New York.